What time's the 7 o'clock meeting? Welcome, everybody. Welcome to New Freedom and Position of Neutrality. We're happy to have you here. Thank you all for showing up. We're going to start this meeting like we started every other with Chaplain giving us a prayer.
Come on and stand. Stand to your feet all over the room.
There we go.
Amen. Father, we thank you on tonight. We give you the praise, glory, and honor, and we welcome you into this place. We ask you, Lord, that you will just join us here tonight as we prepare to go into step 2. We recognize that we come to believe, but we know we can't believe in nothing but you. We understand, God, that you're here tonight for us, to lead us, to use your manservant to speak through him. God, we thank you for what you're doing here at New Freedom, but most of all, we thank you what you're doing in the lives of each and every one in this room. We recognize we could not make it without you, and we just invite your spirit in this place. So we thank you, we praise you, we give you all the glory. Bless Joe and Denise on their travel time and when they are away. And we believe that you bring them back safely. But tonight, we thank you for using your manservant, Brother Wayne, as he begins to speak life to each and every one in here. In the mighty name of Jesus, let everyone say, Amen.
Thank you, chap. Thank you. Everybody, why don't we use this book in 12-step recovery? Because the process described by the authors has been proven to work for addicts of the hopeless variety, addicts to alcohol and other substances. Forgive my nervousness. I'll stop shaking here in a minute. It'll go away. Thank you, guys. Woo! All right. What we do here is a little different than you'll experience in other places, right? We want to align our experience with that of the authors, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I find my experience in the book and hopefully explain some stuff to you all tonight. Are we ready? Yeah. All right, we're going to start in chapter 4 on page 44, We Agnostics. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. What have we learned about alcoholism so far? It'll kill you. It's an appalling lack of perspective, right? We can't stop. Yeah, obsession of the mind, manifestation of an allergy, absolutely, right? And we're powerless over it. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Have we done that so far? Right, we all understand that, right? And they're smart. They go on to describe it for us and give us a definition. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. Do we fit that category? For most of us sitting in this room tonight? If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience can conquer. So they're kind of jumping right into it right here and saying, if you're the alcoholic who's in this category, the hopeless variety, the one who can't stop once he starts, a spiritual experience is probably the only thing that's going to help. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he's an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. So are we aligning our experience with that of the authors right now? Right, we're all there. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. Because the alternatives are right, live a happy, joyous, and free life, or suffer an alcoholic death. And many of us have, right, many of us have spent our life wanting that happy, joyous, and free life, but not wanting to quit the alcohol, quit the drugs. But it isn't so difficult. About half our fellowship, our original fellowship, were of exactly that type. What type were they? Atheists or agnostics declare. God doesn't exist, he can't be proven to exist, but what they're telling you is half of the original fellowship, right? I'm just reiterating kind of what they said, but half the original fellowship were of exactly this type. They didn't believe in God, they didn't need a spiritual experience. I'm going to do it on my own. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up, something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostic. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. So they're saying, don't worry. We were just like that. So if you're thinking that, God doesn't exist, I can't do this. There we go. I'm going to say God a lot. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. So what they're trying to describe to us right here is, you hear it all the time, right? Change your playmates and playthings, right? Change the rules of your life, whatever that kind of stuff is, whatever you may make up. I'm only going to use on the weekends, or I'm only going to, whatever. We always make that shit up, right? It's, you know, the amount of excuses and the amount of things that we put on ourselves are, you know, there's an infinite number of them, right? What they're saying is, we tried that, it didn't work. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us no matter how much we tried. So there they just a little confirmation, right? We could wish to be moral, or we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed us utterly. Yeah. Well, have you guys ever had a computer that just quit working? It failed utterly, right? That's kind of what they're trying to describe right here. Our human resources, right? Their own willpower, their own ability to function in life had just completely failed. This makes my mouth go dry. Thank you, guys. They're going to tell us what the problem is next, right? Lack of power. Wait. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how were we to find this power? Where do we find the power? Does everybody know? Deep down inside. We're gonna go confirm it on page 55 real quick. So we like to be. Yeah, we don't want you to take our word for it. We want to show you in the book what it says. Second paragraph down. Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down in every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. I'm getting better at that. Remember the first 2 times it wasn't so good? Is everybody in the room a man, woman, or child? Yeah, mostly, yeah. So that pretty much includes all of us. And it also says the fundamental idea of God was deep down inside you, not your idea of God. There we go. All right. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship of other things, but in some form or other, it is there. Calamities, the traumas that we've experienced in our lives, right? Pomps, the attitude and ego that we put out there, and worship. We all have a little familiarity with things that we've worshiped in our lives, right? That weren't God. I snuck that one in. For faith in a power greater than ourselves and miraculous demonstrations of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. Yeah. They go on later in the book to talk about how, you know, religious people have been doing something right, and to see where they are right, not that they are right. But we finally saw that faith in some kind of God was a part of our makeup just as much as the feeling we have for a friend. So what they're saying is not that God is a feeling. They're not saying that the power is a feeling. What they're saying is your awareness of that power in your life will come as a feeling. Right? Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but he was there. He was as much a fact as we were. We found that the great reality, notice the capital letters there, deep down within us. In the last analysis, it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. And Joe, I haven't ever heard Joe do this very next paragraph, but as I was reading and preparing the other day, I saw it and I just thought, oh, that's very interesting. So I'm going to read on just a little bit. It says, we can only clear the ground a bit. And remember, these are the authors, right? The people who had experienced this. They'd been at it a couple of years. They'd studied the word and had experiences with other people, right? We can only clear the ground a bit. So they're saying we're not going to get it all the way out of the way. We're not going to completely change your mind. But as we go through this process, you're going to start here. They're going to talk about it a little bit more. God is going to meet you where you're at, right? And they talk about laying aside prejudice and your bias and expressing that to us, to those of us who have had a spiritual experience. But that's what I just feel like that's important. If our testimony helps sweep away prejudice, enables you to think honestly, encourages you to search diligently within yourself, then if you wish, you can join us on the broad highway. With this attitude, you cannot fail. That's a heck of a promise, right? Search fearlessly. The consciousness of your belief is sure to come. That kind of goes hand in hand with what it was talking about, right? You'll be aware of him like a friend in your life, right? The consciousness of your belief is sure to come. Thank you. We're going to go back to page 45 real quick, where we left off. Obviously, but where and how are we to find that power? Deep down inside. And then we're going to go on and it's going to tell us, well, like, that's exactly what this book is about. So that's the purpose of 12-step recovery, right? Is to come into a relationship with a higher power that's going to enable me to walk through life a way better person than I was before, right? We are going to think the way we still think, and sometimes we'll act the way that I do it, but I do it I'm better a great percentage of the time. And they just promised me that if I'll search for it, right, it'll work. You know what I mean? We'll get results. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. What is it? What is our problem? Right, there's not really any right or wrong answer, right? But really, liquor was but a symptom, is what it tells us. That wasn't my problem, really. It's my therapist is going to come out here for a second, right? That's my coping mechanism that I use to cope with all the bullshit in my life, really. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we're going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics. Many times we talk to a man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we have opened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded or entirely ignored. And I think it's really funny. The idea of religious trauma has been coming up the last few days, right? Mostly, if the fundamental idea of God, I tricked you. The fundamental idea of God lives deep down inside of you, right? And that means that we're drawn to this power, right, by which we can live. Then why do we turn away so readily, right? It's usually because we've been hurt. What we're saying is, come to us, let us teach you about this power that's loving and non-judgmental, and will empower you to live and walk freer in this world. We know how he feels. Did I read that already? No. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. And that's what they say. Share your honest doubt and prejudice with us, right? We've been there. We get it. We know it. Let's walk through it. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. That's the point I was trying to make. Where does the violence come from? If you're violently anti-religious, why? Right, because we've been hurt. We typically only get mad at things that we love. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. To other words, that word brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood, right? So we've got this certain idea of God. I know I had one, right? And I imagine God sitting on some sitting on some throne, judging, waiting to smite people like he did Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And so that's the idea that I always had of God. So that's like one way. With that rejection, and then it talks about being inadequate, right? Humans trying to describe God and define God doesn't work very well either, so it seems inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence on a power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. And so that's another thing too, right? Jesus taught about turning the other cheek, and so we think if we're loving and kind and acting the way that, you know, the guy in the church was telling me that this spiteful God should be, right? It seems pretty weak and cowardly, right? I'm strong. I don't need, I can do anything. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance at many individuals who claim to be godly. That one doesn't count, does it? We looked askance at many individuals. I did that already. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet a supreme being, right? Yet in other moments we found ourselves, I'm going to back up a second really quick. So what they're describing here all the time is the many different ways that people think about our creators, about God, right? Like we look around and we go, why is there suffering in this world? Why would God allow that to happen? Right? So that's really what the authors are describing. Everybody's going to fall in one of these categories, right? And then it says, who could comprehend a supreme being anyway? Right? A supreme being that has the order to create everything that you see. Right? Yet in other moments we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. So now they're talking about that crack in the armor. Right? If I'm being really honest with myself, and I've looked back on throughout my life, and I've been laying under the stars with a pretty girl, or I've been seeing something just beautiful and wondrous, right? Just looking out across the ocean or something like that. And you have those moments when you think, man, did this just spring into existence? That's kind of what the authors are describing right there. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you, we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. Right? So what they're saying is God's going to meet you where you're at. This always happens for me on step 2. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even just a little amount of willingness, there is something greater than myself, right? Joe says it all the time. If you don't think there's a power greater than yourselves, then what do you call cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and alcohol? And alcohol. Sorry, Sean, I'll make sure I get it in. Right? Because they were definitely a power greater than myself. So I worshipped at the altar of methamphetamine. Right? I did everything for it. It didn't matter, and I didn't care. Calamities, pomps, and worships. And it was definitely had beaten me into a state of reasonableness. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Why don't we? Why don't we need someone's conception of God? Well, because God's not a conception. He's a tangible sensory experience, right? Joe always says it, and I just love it. It took me a long time to get it, right? He is the subject of my experience, not the object of my devotion. You know, I have experienced God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit in the universe underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. What do you think the other simple steps might be? Yeah, we're in 2, so probably at least through 12. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we only had to admit the possible existence. I'm not asking you to change your beliefs. I'm not asking you to do anything. There is a power greater than me. I'm going to seek a connection with that power. That's what they're saying. That's what they're describing, right? And just in that moment, they promise we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of the Spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. We just read the invitation, right? If you're willing to seek and willing to do, come be with us. We invite you on the broad highway. When, therefore, we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. So what they're just kind of saying to you is we all have a thing. I don't know if you're raised in one church faith. You may know what this means in that faith or something like that. What they're saying is don't allow that to these preconceived ideas and notions that you may have learned to immediately turn you off, right? Get that pit in your stomach where you're just like, oh, that means I'm going to have to do A, B, and C. That's not what it means, right? Necessarily. Discover what they mean for you. Search, seek, figure it out. Talk to this newfound power that's giving you a new sense of power and direction, and work on it with him. This applied, I read that already. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. That's all we needed to start, right? That's what it's saying. Seek, ask. Afterward, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. So they're saying our minds began to get changed, I think is what they're saying, right? They began to have this new sense of, this new spiritual experience. They began to grow in the Spirit. And what they once thought was not the same anymore. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited it was. Because again, they just told us, who can comprehend a supreme being? Another supreme being. We need to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe there is a power greater than myself? Yes. As soon as a man can say that he does believe, or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. We emphatically assure him that he's on his way. Are you now willing to believe? Or do you already? Absolutely, right? And so now you can build this spiritual structure, right? And I like to use the word cornerstone right here. It applies to another book too. Anybody that reads that one will understand what we're talking about. That was great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. I don't know what I was going to say. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has? I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. My friend was telling me a story about going to a church camp and seeing during the praise and worship part of it, somebody just praising and got his hands in the air and he's just like all wrapped up into it and looking at him and saying, why is it so easy for him? And not understanding what, you know what I mean? Probably what went behind it. It was probably, he was raised a certain way and he had certain ideas of what that meant. Whatever it is, right? We all make our own stuff up. That's what the authors are describing right here. I wish I could have what that man has, but I can't. Somebody is calling me in the middle of this. Everybody, what are they thinking? Everybody in my life knows I'm doing this right now. I hope they're watching. I should have put that sucker on Do Not Disturb. That was my fault, probably. Man, I was right in the middle of a good thought, too. I wish I had that. The authors are just describing, right? They're kind of going deeper, trying to get deeper into it, right? So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. So they're just explaining to you all of that, all of the religious experiences that you've had, all the biases, all the prejudices, right? All you have to do is be willing to believe and start at this much simpler level. God meets you where you're at. Come on, scream it. Power. Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. They just keep talking about it more and more. This sort of thing had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. That's what they're saying. The atheists and agnostics of the original 100 are saying, we believe just like this. We resisted, but we didn't really find it too hard after admitting that there was a power greater than us. We just believed in that. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. For me, it was methamphetamines, but Sean, it was the great persuader. Sometimes it finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. Mine was tedious at times. Anybody else? Okay, Carrie Ann's got hers up. Brian's got his up. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. So they must have been really good doubters, right? Because they've been talking about it quite a bit. Right? If you still haven't got there, let's keep going. We think there are good reasons. Let us look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Everybody believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Because simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without reasonable assumption as a starting point. So how do we know the light came on? Because we see it, right? There's evidence. There's tangible, sensory evidence that it came on, right? Do you see the electricity going through the wires? Not at all. Yeah, we believe it. Pour water on it. That'd shock the shit out of you, like Sean said. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is no good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. Oh, excuse me, I read that wrong. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. And they're going to describe some stuff for us. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speeds. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws, and these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. So what they're trying to describe is this beam right here, right? They lived in New York, so they had big skyscrapers and big I-beams, right? You know what I mean? This prosaic, it's a normal, ugly steel girder going, running through a building, is really a bunch of electrons. Do you guys remember that, learning about that in whatever grade it was? I don't know, it's too many years ago for me now. So, I'm telling you. Right? And I remember thinking, well, how is that so? Why does that work like that, right? You know what I mean? And they tried to explain about density and all that other crap, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? I still don't have any idea. I'm obviously not an engineer, I'm a therapist. So let me crawl inside your mind, so it's all made up. But, but science accepts that. It's a bunch of because a bunch of tiny little atoms spinning around each other, and for some reason it's solid. We can't very well walk through it. Joe calls it a light body, because that's really what it is. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. When, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful, guiding, creative intelligence. Right there, our perverse streak comes to the surface, and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. So they're just describing, we believe in science and we believe in all kinds of things that we absolutely cannot see, but science tells us it's so. So it's proven because science tells us it's so. But yeah, we believe it. So why don't we believe in a creative intelligence underlying the totality of all things? We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments, thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. There's no purpose, no direction. It's a very scary thought. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, we agnostics and atheists chose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end of all. Rather, vain of us wasn't it. Imagine this paragraph made me think of something the other day, and this is kind of how it is. Imagine yourselves, I don't know, you make pots. Just imagine, right? You're this beautiful potter, and you made the absolute jewel. It's the best thing that you've ever made in your life, right? You etched into it, you painted it, you glazed it, you fired it, right? It's just this is the most exquisite pot in the world. Right? People come from all over the place to look at it, right? It's got your name and a little plaque right beside it. But every single person, or about half of them, that walk up and see that go, nope, he didn't make that. That sprang into existence. It's kind of what they're describing right there. There's a little different way. We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. I often think of when I see like normies, people that don't have our condition. I think, like, how did they know to do that? Like, how do they, like cope without like having to go to meetings and read a book and pray and all those things in their life, right? Like that's really what I'm like, how did they know to do it without having to be taught to do it? People of faith have I read that part. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. So what they're talking about, these worldly people indeed, that says, right, they used to sit around and I always imagine these high-rise apartments in New York, you know, doctors and lawyers and academics, right? You know, bitching about how God didn't exist and why he didn't, right? And that's what they're describing right there, right? And instead of looking at the evidence, right, that people all over the world that have faith and are acting in that way that baffles me, act normally. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We just have to remember, right, the church, God's people, are made up of flawed humans just like us. But what they're describing is that instead of thinking that, they blame God for the actions of his people. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. Pretty hypocritical, right? We were diverted by the ugliness of some of... Did I miss something? We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. The authors are saying right here, right? Not everybody had the same one. We're not saying you have to start going to a given church or start studying theology or really even start studying the Bible if that's not what's called for. Just get into a relationship, right? Start there at that base. You thought I was getting ready to say power, or what was that? You're getting ready? Just get into a relationship. Start where you're at. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. This is the authors telling you, this is personal to you. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks. You don't have to impress anybody. You don't have to do it for anybody when it comes to this relationship. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them, and this is the benefit of what they got from starting at that base, that thing. This is my conception. This is where I'm at. I'm going to seek out into it, right? Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. It's miracles happening. We got a whole bunch of miracles sitting around here. I just love it. I see my old freedom guide sitting here, and I just love it. That's power. That's the evidence of power working in this building and working in people's lives. As a celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record. Here are thousands of men and women worldly indeed, right? What is worldly indeed? Doctors, lawyers, right? The scientists, probably, right? All these people, worldly indeed, sitting around in the lofty rooms, arguing about religion and why it's not true. We got to believe in evolution or something. They flatly declare that since they have come to believe in a power greater than themselves, to take a certain attitude toward that power, and to do certain simple things, there has been a revolutionary change in their way of living and thinking. How many of you around here needed a revolutionary way in your Absolutely. Absolutely. In the face of collapse and despair, in the face of the total failure of their human resources, they've found that a new power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction flowed into them. Power, peace, happiness, sense of direction. Does any of that sound bad? Not a bit. And it flowed into them. Didn't drip, didn't trickle, right? Came flooding, flowing into them. This happened soon after they wholeheartedly met a few simple requirements. What were the requirements? They kind of just told us. Right? Learn this manner of living, right? I'm getting a little ahead, right? The watch, ask, discuss, turn, right? That we're learning to do. Because this is a manner of living. It's not just a bunch of check boxes. As much as we may like check boxes because then I've accomplished something, right? It's not a bunch of check boxes. This is something we're going to do every day, every day, every day. And we're going to get better at it, and we're going to have slip-ups. I'm not saying we use, but I'm saying we're going to stomp our feet. Like, have you ever seen a 49-year-old man stomp his feet like a 2-year-old? Listen, it is not cute. It is not cute. But that's going to get better. We're going to get better and better at that, right? Once confused and baffled by this seeming futility of existence, they show the underlying reasons why they were making heavy going of life. Leaving aside the drink question, they tell why living was so unsatisfactory. They show how the change came over them when many hundreds of people are able to say that the consciousness of the presence of God is today the most important fact of their lives. They present a powerful reason why one should have faith. So what they're saying right now is all of these people, half of them atheists or agnostic, are saying that the consciousness of the presence of God is the most important thing in their life. That's their testimony. So that's a pretty good reason why people should have faith. That's what they're saying. All right, let's jump over to page 53. And I'm looking at the clock like Joe does, like I really know how long it's going to take me to get through it. The middle of the page in 53. When we became alcoholics, crushed by a self-imposed crisis, we could not postpone or evade. We had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? He is. He is. When we became when did we become alcoholics? When we fully concede to our innermost selves. Right? We diagnose ourselves, right? Inability to stop and stay stopped, inability to control how much we take after we do it, right? We know all these things, right? But I don't really become an alcoholic. What does Joe say? Help me with this one, Sean, because I don't want to get this one wrong. What does Joe say? We only become alcoholic in a meaningful way when we've admitted it. Mm-hmm. I thought he said something fancier. We had to face the proposition, right? I can't do life any other way. So I've tried all my human wills have failed me. All my human resources have failed me. So I've come to this point where either God is everything or he's nothing. Arrived at this point, we were squarely confronted with the question of faith. We couldn't duck the issue. Some of us had already walked far over the bridge of reason toward the desired shore of faith. The outlines and the promise of the new land had brought luster to tired eyes and fresh courage to flagging spirits. Friendly hands had reached out in welcome. We were grateful that reason had brought us so far, but somehow we couldn't quite step ashore. Perhaps we had been leaning too heavily on reason that last mile, and we did not get to lose our support. That was natural, but let us think a little more closely. Without knowing it, had we not been brought to where we stood by a certain kind of faith. So I think what they're saying, right, is that if they look back over their lives and were honest with themselves, there were moments in their lives where they had been expressing faith without even knowing it. For did we not believe in our own reasoning? Did we not have confidence in our ability to think? What was that but a sort of faith? Yes, we had been faithful, abjectly faithful to the God of reason. So in one way or another, we discovered that faith had been involved all the time. We found, too, that we had been worshipers. What a state of mental goose. I don't think I read that last time. Did I? We found, too, that we had been worshipers. What a state of mental goose flesh that used to bring on. Had we not variously worshipped people, sentiment, things, money, and ourselves? It's talking about these worships that we have in our lives, right? Sometimes it's money, sometimes it's work, sometimes it's a person. Sex, somebody said, right? And then, with a better motive, had we not worshipfully beheld the sunset, the sea, or a flower, looking at those starlit nights, right? It's kind of bringing it all back around to us. Who of us had not loved something or somebody? How much did these feelings, these loves, these worships have to do with pure reason? Nothing at all. Little or nothing, they say, right? We saw at last. Were not these things the tissue out of which our lives were constructed? Did not these things, after all, determine the course of our existence? Listen, it's asking all these questions, right? Begin to ask these questions to yourself. They're asking you to go introspectively, right? Eyesight without insight is spiritual blindness, right? So anytime you see a question mark in this book, ask yourself those questions, or what it is they might mean to you. Did not these feelings, after all, determine the course of our existence? It was impossible to say we had no capacity for faith or love or worship. In one form or another, we have been living by faith and little else. So they're saying that we have a problem with the word faith, right? Because it's probably because of the object of our faith rather than the subject of our faith once we've had an encounter and an experience with God. All right. All right, let's go over to let's go over and talk about Fitz. Fitz was our minister's son. Our friend was a minister's son. This is just kind of a story that wraps all of this up. Oh, 56, sorry. Thank you, Sean. Fitz was a minister's son, right? He raised in the church, got mad at the church, left the church, didn't do it anymore, had, all this anger and stuff against God and all these calamities and pomps and worships in his life, right? So that's kind of where we pick it up, right? Our friend was a minister's son. He attended church school where he became rebellious at what he thought an overdose of religious education. For years thereafter, he was dogged by trouble and frustration, business failure, insanity, fatal illness, suicide. These calamities in his immediate family embittered and depressed him. So there's always calamities, right? Post-war disillusionment, even more serious alcoholism, impending mental and physical collapse brought him to the point of self-destruction. One night when confined in a hospital, because that's how bad he'd gotten, right? He's living in a hospital, or had, admitted to a hospital. He was approached by an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience. And when they say an alcoholic who had known a spiritual experience, he's talking about somebody in the program, somebody who had an encounter with God, not just, not just some church folks that had showed up or anything like that. Our friend's gorge rose as he bitterly cried out, "If there is a God, he certainly hasn't done anything for me." So he's just getting mad at the guy, right? He's got that violent reaction. But later, alone in his room, he asked himself this question. He's getting introspective, right, about these questions. Is it possible that all the religious people I have known are wrong? I mean, when we think about it, if we're being really logical, there's how many? 8 billion people in the world? And more than half of them believe in a God? Could they all be wrong? I mean, that's kind of the thought. I think there was less people at the time, but while pondering the answer, he felt as though he lived in hell. Then, like a thunderbolt, a great thought came. It crowded out all else. Who are you to say there is no God? And I always imagined that this was whispered. It may have crowded out every thought in his mind, but I think it was a whisper and not a shout. Be still and know that I am God. The man recounts that he tumbled out of bed to his knees. In a few seconds, he was overwhelmed by the conviction of the presence of God. It poured over and through him with the certainty and majesty of a great tide at flood. The barriers he had built through the years were swept away. He stood in the presence of infinite power and love. He had stepped from bridge to shore. For the first time, he lived in conscious companionship with his Creator. So here was this guy raised in the church, and he do it, and a thought crowded out everything else in his life. And in that moment of encounter, his life completely changed. A great tide came rushing into him. Power, peace, happiness, and a sense of direction. Thus was our friend's cornerstone fixed in place. No later vicissitude has shaken it. His alcoholic problem was taken away. Because we've ceased fighting everything and everyone, right? You will feel that the liquor problem has been removed completely. That's the promise. It's not something we're struggling with for the rest of our lives, guys. That very night, years ago, it disappeared. Save for a few brief moments of temptation, the thought of drink has never returned. And at such times, a great revulsion has risen up in him. Seemingly, he could not drink even if he would. God had restored his sanity. I'm just going to tell a little story, right? So I'm sitting in a treatment center, and it was run by the Department of Corrections up here. I didn't have much of a choice, right? And I had asked my friend Carrie Ann to be my sponsor because, you know, I had a million reasons why I needed to do it the way they told me not to do it. And she gave me these wonderful sheets by this lady, right? And I just had to write a bunch of stuff. And I got through step 1, I got through step 2, right? And then it asked me to list all the things for step 3 that I was willing to give to God. And I know I'm getting a little bit ahead, right? And I put all kinds of things on there. I put things on there that, like, I didn't even want to admit to people that I was willing to give to God, right? Right? And so then the next step of the assignment was to pray over it, pray the 3rd step prayer, and just pray all this stuff. And so I did that, and I was weeping, and I was crying, and I said the 3rd step prayer, and I gave all this stuff to God, and I knew in that moment that a freedom had occurred. It was like a weight. Like I felt like my shoulders had been hunched like this, and then all of a sudden they weren't anymore, right? So much so that I went walking across the yard, I'll say campus, right? To tell somebody who would later be my sponsor after a little while, but I said, oh my God, I think this happened. I don't know. I didn't say God, you guys. I think this happened. And he said, it absolutely did happen. Own it, right? And so I spent the next 6 months praying to God. God, why I've given you my will in my life 1,000,000 times. I've done it sitting on jailhouse floors. I've done it in the trap house. I've done it in the church. And damn it, I meant it every single time. And so I was praying, and I would just pray this. Not every single day, but, you know, every so often I would pray this for 6 months. This happened in like June or July, and it's the beginning of December of that same year. And I'm driving to my peer support class, right? Because I don't know why the hell I needed to be a peer support, but at the time, that's what I felt led to do, right? This is what God's telling me to do. I was in school. I was doing all these things. And one day, this whisper came to my head, and everything else was gone. And because I had asked, why this time? What was different this time? And an answer as clear as a bell said, it wasn't step 3. It was when you came to believe that I loved you enough to do it. Oh, he ain't lying. When somebody here, anyway, what is this but a miracle of healing? yet its elements are simple. Circumstances made him willing to believe. He humbly offered himself to his Maker. Then he knew. Even so, God has restored us all to our right minds. To this man, the revelation was sudden. Some of us grow into it more slowly, but he has come to all who have honestly sought him. When we drew near to him, he disclosed himself to us. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night. Joel will be back next week. Thank you. Oh.